All right, so we are at 12:01. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Sauce here. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of our Teaching and Learning Center, and I am so excited you found our way to our professional development series. We meet every noon, Wednesdays during the academic year, and today's going to be a teaching chat. Before we get to that, and before we do some other announcements, we're going to begin with a land acknowledgement.
All right, let me share my screen and sound. And then Don, whenever you see it, will you give me a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. Okay, here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilize the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
Thank you. I want to remind you, not only does the TLC Professional Development Series meet every week, we also archive our events for asynchronous viewing on our webpage. So this event will be recorded. You can share it with colleagues. We had a wonderful event last week that you probably shared with colleagues between now and then. And we have a bunch of wonderful events coming up. For instance, next week, Andy Thompson from our Office of Student Support and Accountability will be presenting on how we follow through on the promise of support. And that is a need to know event. And you're like, what is a need to know event? We have certificates that we've got for professional development, both to faculty and staff, as well as to graduate teaching assistants. And to earn those, you got to have a certain number of need to know events that you can attend. So those are available for you. And we have the information for that contained in a link that my colleague Ashley has just dropped into the chat. Thank you, Ashley. If you're a faculty member and interested in potentially being selected as a TLC fellow, we have information at that link about that as well. So we are very excited. Today is a teaching chat. This is our first teaching chat of the fall semester. For those of you who have been in our teaching professional development series before, you're aware that about once a month we have a teaching chat. And what this is, sort of like TLC office hours in some ways. It's a place where we can kind of bring concerns, we can bring issues, we can bring questions, we can kind of crowdsource the answers. But I also have a couple of topics that I would like to kind of pick your brain about as well as we come to here. So I'll kind of introduce those, and to let you know, there's going to be kind of the differences and surprises that maybe you're experiencing this semester versus previous semesters. I'll be willing to kind of share some of my experiences at this point, but I definitely want to hear yours. But before we get to that aspect of our chat, I'm wondering if anyone has any questions or issues that they would like to address with our wonderful group.
I have something. I thought there's something in the chat. I don't know if anybody's saying, "Can I go?" or is there somebody else?
Oh, the thing in the chat was Ashley dropping the link in there for stuff. So there's not a
Ashley's
chat
so
comment
awesome.
I'm aware
She's on
of.
top of
So
it.
Slava, want to
Yeah.
hear what you got?
So last week, so my students they do quizzes before the first day of the week, and we go over in class called study opportunities. That's just a little background. But a student had messed up. They said they didn't realize it was timed, and which I don't know how you can miss it, but I said fine, whatever. I let them redo it. I don't have an issue with that. And they emailed me back saying thank you, and they were like, I appreciate that you're a professor who actually cares about their students. Now, it's kind of gave me mixed feelings because thank you, but also like one is like, hey, like I don't like other professors being crapped on, and I understand everybody doesn't care at the same level, but it's also like, and not that not the students like meant this, but it feels a little bit manipulative as like, hey, in the future, if I say no, are you gonna be like, well, I guess you don't care about me then. So I did respond, and I had this whole thing written down, and I had a friend look at it, and they were like, "Don't say all that." I was like, "Okay," and I was just like, "Hey, thank you." I said it's not a problem because I explained why I didn't think it was a big deal, and I was like, "Hey, in the future, you might ask, and I might say no. Hopefully, you don't feel like this means that I don't care about you as a student." So, I guess my question is, for people, have you gotten things like this? What should their response be? What do you think about my response? Just any of those, if that's a question.
All right, so who wants first?
So Slava, I love that question because I'm a really kind and compassionate person who wants to have boundaries and not get taken advantage of. But it sounds like I appreciate how you navigated it. You explained like where you were coming from, where it was going. I heard an excellent podcast. I can't remember who was talking, but the phrase that they shared was not letting things scar at the first cut. And that has stayed with me for a lot of different things. If something happens one time, don't let it scar you the first time around. So if the student doesn't do it again, it's not a big deal. If it becomes a pattern, then you can address it. But I think sometimes we try to be really proactive and prevent problems, which is awesome. But it can also, coming from someone who's done this, we can worry too much about the future, about what might happen or what might not happen. So I think it's totally fine to let it go with the student. And then if it happens again, you can say, hey, this is the second time. I'm not going to do this a second time where I am, but this is the last time. I do care about you. I don't want to enable you. I want you to be responsible. You can still show how you care about that person. But I don't know, that was a helpful thing for me to hear. I thought I'd share it with you.
Melissa, as always, that is a fantastic comment. I just have to insert a Greg Eislein quote because, as many of you know, I quote Greg daily. This is actually my second Greg Eislein quote of the day. Greg would say that the Stoics say that you shouldn't worry about things that haven't happened. So it's kind of focusing a little bit on the present and those kind of things. And I'm probably the king of worrying about things that haven't happened. So I give that as second person advice. It's not advice I follow myself. What do the rest of y'all think about, though, the way that the student kind of addressed the situation, the way that Slava responded? Have we had these kind of situations in our classes?
I've certainly had that a similar type of reaction where students make comments that are like that I feel very conflicted about, where they are pointing out like how great some aspect of my course is or something that I do, and in a way that talks about how they're not getting that in other classes. And it always makes me feel a little sad that they feel like they're not getting it in other classes. There are sometimes where I feel like there's a little bit of manipulation involved, that they're trying to butter me up. I think that the way that you handled it by being very just direct and factual and saying like, just because I say no doesn't mean that I don't care about you. I think that sets you up for good success throughout the semester. And I've found that telling students, just being very clear about my whys in whether I say yes or no, in any situation, right? Like, the first 2 weeks of the semester, my students, all kinds of things happen. They don't do an assignment because they didn't realize they had to do it. Getting accustomed to the new rhythm of the semester is always a little bit challenging. So I tend to be really flexible in the first 2 weeks, and I let them know, like, we're all getting used to this new semester. Do not expect me to be doing this all throughout the semester, but I understand that while we're getting used to the new rhythms, a little grace is needed. And so for the first 2 weeks, like, at the end of the first 2 weeks, I don't tell them in advance, but at the end of the first 2 weeks, I say, I'm going to any like late penalties, anything that you did, I'm accepting all of it. No questions, just like I'm accepting all of the things that we've done so far. We're going to move forward, and all the policies that are in the syllabus apply for the rest of the semester. So I think that just being very clear about what your expectations are, and the way that you did that, I think is a very nice way to be like, thank you, but like me saying no doesn't make me mean or not care about my students.
As Slava, as you're aware, no matter what I say in the body of my message back to a student, it always begins with thanks for your message, and it always ends with I hope all is well. So, I kind of have the caring at the front and then back, even if it's not going to show up as much in the middle in the way the student wants it to. So one of the things here, and by the way, for those of you kind of keeping score, the social psych term for what Slava is worried about in terms of that manipulation is called alter casting. where someone kind of puts you into a role, and then if you were behave differently, you have to give up that role that you wanted. And it's one of Cialdini's principles of consistency. You want to be consistent with that role that someone has given you. So, oh, you're so helpful, you follow with a request. The person has to accept the request, otherwise they're no longer helpful. Do our students really work us like this that often? So one of the things that, I do wonder is, when Slava first read that, I wondered if it was just a grateful student, no extra subtext, no extra thing desired, or am I being too optimistic in thinking that, is it important we kind of get out in front of this possibility? I'm just kind of wondering, how much do we have to monitor for our students working us like this?
I think I have a
And
thought
Kristen, I
about
see your
that.
hand. Yes.
Because I was thinking about whether to respond, because I think I would have a similar initial reaction of this feels manipulative to me. And I think that's from my personal history, so I always have to watch that. I'm very alert to like potential manipulations. And so I think I probably would have gone through like a similar process of like writing this whole thing. And then I probably would have had a good friend who like told me like, no, you don't need to do that. And I think the way it was handled was really good. But I do think like depending on personal experience, you have more. I have been told by like therapists that I have like, kind of a tendency to like smell smoke when there's, it's the toaster burning a piece of toast. It's not an actual fire, is what they say, right? And so it's like just being aware of your own tendencies in this regard. And I don't know, like in my grumpy moods, I'm like, well, I'm right and everybody's manipulative, right? But that's maybe not the best way to view things. But I do think I would have been on alert as well with that kind of, and it also has the vibe that gets a lot of attention in social media these days of like, oh, you're not like other girls. And it's like, well, what's your problem with other girls? Like men will say that to try to like impress you, like, oh, I see something in you. And it's like, okay, why can't you just appreciate other girls? And why don't you like your other professors? Like this seems like a you problem, not a me problem. But anyway, the alter casting is an interesting way to think about it, because I think that does happen.
Now, one of the things that also kind of occurs to me, and Slava acknowledged this, is the student might be right? It might be the case that they're having negative experiences with other professors who may not care as much, right? Like I had my daughter is a sophomore at Manhattan High School, and she came home and said that, someone asked one of her teachers for something, and the teacher replied potentially sarcastically, right? So I'll put this out there, potentially sarcastically, and said, I'm not going to entertain that possibility because I don't want you to think that I care about what you think. And there's a possibility that meant that sarcastically for humor. That's not the way my daughter took it. And it's one of those things that they might actually be having teachers who are putting their kind of draconian, kind of Spartan kind of policies onto their students with pride, and it might be sort of the case where the students saying to Slava, like, hey, thank you so much for being one of the ones who cares. That might be their experience, is that many of them are not showing that they care. So I don't know. I'm trying to kind of think about the ideology of the comment, the meaning of the comment, and in reality, we'll never know, right? We won't be able to kind of figure that out. But I'm just trying to think for myself in kind of dealing with students, what I can kind of take away from Slava's experience, because vicarious learning is amazing. If I can go through it because Slava went through it, that's awesome for me. So any kind of other thoughts?
I'm pretty similar in philosophy as Andy and Melissa, that I want to be flexible, and I think I'm lucky that the course topics I teach have allowed me to design my course and my assignments so that in pretty much any circumstance I can grant that flexibility. And so what I tell students is that as long as they let me know ahead of time that they've got something come up, they can't get this assignment done, they can't be at class, I can accommodate that. It doesn't put any additional work on me. Now, certainly there's the question as to, does that prepare them for life? I don't know. I'd like to think that some people would argue that, yeah, they're going to go out into the workplace and they're going to have these draconian deadlines. And my response is that, well, I'm trying to teach them that it doesn't have to be that way. Like, if they're the boss, they can choose to be flexible. They can listen to, they can show empathy and trying to model that. So I've been able to do it. And here's the thing that is beneficial for me. I find myself that when students are emailing and asking me, hey, I'm not going to be here, can I get an extension on this assignment? I get to say yes a lot of times. And that's good for my own mental health, is that I feel like I'm saying yes, I'm saying yes, I'm saying yes. And I don't feel like I have to have that battle of, should I be saying no? I've designed the course so that it doesn't cause me additional work to tell a student, yeah, that's fine. Thank you for letting me know. Now, I try to train them, you got to let me know ahead of time. If you come after the fact, it's a different story. But as long as they're proactive about letting me know, I'm going to say yes.
So one of the themes of kind of getting some of these answers is kind of letting your students know what the expectations are, what the policies are, being clear and fair with them is definitely a recommendation to kind of take forward on this. So if Slava were to get a same student in the same situation, Slava would behave similarly, right? Because that's his policy. And we're not playing favorites when we're doing those things.
I wanted to highlight one other thing that both Slava and Kristen kind of touched on, and that's this idea of like getting your ideas out first, and like writing that email and then like taking some time to check in. It reminds me of, my sister has a phrase that's let's invite our prefrontal cortex to the conversation. And so I use this all the time. So and I remind my grad students, my GTAs, that like they don't have to respond in the moment, and in fact it's better not to, especially when you have something that kind of makes you have an emotional reaction, like, am I being manipulated, what's happening here? To take a minute and sometimes like write out like, what am I thinking right now, and then like take a minute to stop, reflect, and go, okay, do I need to say this? Inviting in trusted colleagues to say like, is this an appropriate reaction? Is this an appropriate response? And to have a good colleagues who will tell you, you probably shouldn't say this, is always very important. But I think that just remembering that we don't need to respond immediately, and to take time to check our own biases and feelings, and try to remove those feelings before engaging in a response.
Such good advice from people more mature than me. This is awesome. So
I don't know about that. I don't always take my own advice, but
so Slava, thank you for starting us out with that. That was a great situation. Well, it's great for us to talk about, not great to maybe have to experience. So other questions or issues or concerns that people are kind of bringing to the table for today?
I have one.
Yes.
So I have a student, it's a first year CAT community, so all first year freshman students. And I meet with them one-on-one at the beginning of semester. So I've met with most of them. And one of the students I met with, I asked, she's open option or exploratory studies, isn't really sure why she's here in college. She's a member of one of the athletic organizations. So she has that purpose for her. She really doesn't know why she's here, what she's doing, or what she wants. It's just kind of, I don't know what else to do, so I guess I'll go to college. And I know this is a pretty common thing, but I'm curious how you all help a student to be motivated in your class when they're not really motivated for a higher purpose, whether that's college in general or a particular major or goal. Because this student also shared with me, yeah, I didn't do so great in high school because I didn't see the point, so I just wouldn't do the work. So she had come to class and had done the first assignments and met with me and, remembered her appointment on her own and all that good stuff. And so things are on the right track. And she didn't come to class yesterday. She didn't turn the assignment in that was due. It's just a once a week class. So they have one thing due once a week. She was one of the few students that I had said, if you want my number, you can text me and I'll have yours. It's an option. You don't have to. And she had been one of the 3 who had texted me. So I texted her and said, hey, we missed you in class. And she didn't reply. So I don't necessarily think there's something major going on. I think it's just kind of a typical, I don't really know why I'm here or what I'm doing type of thing. So I'm curious how you all respond to that. And then in a similar vein, and I'm asking for a friend who couldn't be here today. She had a meeting. she has a student in her class who just won't participate, won't talk. Even if it's talk to the person next to you, won't do it. So just won't engage. And she's talked to her about it. And it's not, I don't want to talk in front of the class. It's just kind of refuses to engage. So similar but different question. How do you help students find their purpose and their motivation if they don't really have it?
So I'm just jotting your questions down so we don't lose track of both of them. So what do y'all think? I was looking to see if we have any kind of student success or academic advisor folks in the room. I'm not 100% sure we do. But what do we think?
I don't have the answer, but I can share that one of my greatest regrets over the last 6 years was I had a student that I noticed was struggling, and I had some ideas of why they might be struggling. I saw them not show up to class, and I didn't act. And it was almost a semester later, I learned they had dropped out of school. And it was one of my biggest regrets, that I had those impressions that I needed to reach out and see what's going on, how can I help, and I didn't. So I don't think you can ever go wrong reaching out too many times.
Yeah, and just for those of you who may not be aware, not only do you have the opportunity of reaching out in person, but as Andy Thompson's going to talk about us next week, you have the opportunity of doing a student of concern report with our Office of Student Support and Accountability. And what can happen is they can then reach out on your behalf. When you do one of those reports, it's really easy. You go to their website. They're going to ask, kind of what are you seeing? What are you feeling? Is it showing up in their work? All of that. And you have the opportunity of letting them know, yes, you can say that I was the one who kind of brought them to your attention, or no, absolutely not. Don't tell them it was me, or tell them if you need to. So you have those kind of degrees of privacy that you can retain there too. But they're a real good job about kind of reaching out and seeing if there's other things kind of impacting the student outside of our class. Now, again, that doesn't answer Melissa's question. So we have a student who kind of doesn't know why they're here. How can we help that student? And what would help look like? What would like a successful outcome to this be? Because I could see there being a number of ways it could go, and depending on the student's circumstance, that might be okay. So what do we think?
I have to say, I mean, I think that, Melissa, you've already done the good work of reaching out to the student and saying, hey, I noticed that you weren't in class. There's a certain amount that, well, I fully am with Brandon, and that I, as an instructor, want to make sure that I'm offering that support and reaching out. There's also a part of me that says, the old adage, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. If students aren't ready for this, then maybe they need to find something else, right? Not saying that they shouldn't do college or they shouldn't, but like you can't force a student to be ready to engage in class. You can't force a student to be, open to these things. And for some students, maybe it's, okay, I need to take a semester off and refocus, rethink, spend some time working. Or maybe it's just finding the right classes, so taking some time to talk to the student about, what are the things that they like to do in their free time? What are the things that make them curious? Because I think that a lot of times if you can get them into the right courses that will make them go like, oh, that's fascinating, that goes a really long way. It's hard when the semester is already started and they're already enrolled in classes that might not be those classes, which is where maybe taking some time to have a real tough conversation with a trusted advisor about, do I continue with this semester, or do I maybe take a break and come back when I'm ready?
I would say in kind of a similar lines, it occurs to me, it's kind of important what the mismatch is, right? So is the mismatch that they don't feel valued here? Well, that's something, we can work with. Is the mismatch they're experiencing the imposter phenomenon and they don't feel good enough? That's something we can work with. If there's mismatches, they don't see a connection of the work they're doing now for what they eventually want to do. That's again, potentially something we can work with. If they're just homesick, that's something we can work with. So I think for me, it'd be kind of figuring out, what is that disconnect? What is that mismatch? And then what options do we have? If they're just like, I don't need college to do what I want to do, and I'm just wasting time before I start my real life, Well, college doesn't prepare everyone for the things that they want to do. So that might be something where, okay, then let's get you connected with that next thing. But I think I'd kind of want to know, what's going on. And if, me reaching out and letting the student know, hey, just so you know, I want you here. You belong. You're valuable. I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate you being in my class, and you're good enough to do this. If the student knows all that and they're just not interested in college, then I will have felt better that I helped with the things that I could potentially help with. And Natalie dropped in the chat, from a developmental standpoint, most SSAs do not truly know what they want to become, even if they say they do. Just sharing that with them is a huge relief to many. And then discussing how you find your ways helpful. I'm sorry I did not acknowledge that we have an expert on emerging adulthood. That is Natalie's domain of research. So yes, this is definitely one of the things they're going through. Natalie, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I would just say most of the time when I teach students that this is normal, that comes out, because everyone thinks they have to know, because society asks them all the time, what are you gonna do? 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 And they often will just do what they think is next. So going to college is often what they think is next, and just letting them know that even those who say, I'm this major and I'm gonna do this with my life, they don't even really know. Everyone kind of takes their time experimenting to find where they need to be, even if they don't share that with you, I think gives a lot of people relief. But then you don't want them, though, to sit in the place of, I don't know what I want ever. That's not a good place to be. And that deteriorates mental health quickly. So just saying it's fine to not know. Here's ways to start trying to figure it out, like different classes or different organizations, is really helpful. But yeah, you can't make them do it, as Andy said too. So you kind of give them the options and then support them. And I would say, Melissa, just the fact that you text her and notice that she's not there is huge. And I think you just keep doing that. And eventually they're gonna be like, oh, you really do notice I'm not here. You really do care. They'll come to you for other things too. So that's amazing.
I was gonna say, following up on what Natalie was saying, with my students who are freaking out about what they want to do after college, one thing I tell them is your job isn't to figure out what you want to do with your life, because we all don't know what we want to do with our lives. It's a constant struggle. Your job is to figure out things you like and things you don't like and start putting them together to find a pattern, and that will help you make choices in the future. And for some students, I think that helps them break it down. Like, I don't have to figure out my dream job. I just have to figure out what I like and don't like. And that first job can help me really figure out some of that stuff pretty quickly.
That is an excellent point, Clarissa. Brandon also talks about the possibility of connecting them with other students, so other students can kind of share how they found their passion and their purpose as they went through. And Andy notes, which is true of many of us, that Andy still doesn't know what they want to do. So it's we're not yet who we will be. That's kind of how this goes. A couple of years ago, Wes Moore, who is now the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore came and gave a talk. The Other Wes Moore was the book we had read as part of the Kansas State Book Network that year. And one of the things that he kind of started out in his talk, and Wes Moore is an amazing speaker. He started out as like, for those of you in sitting here who are college students, people always ask you what's your major. And he said, that's a ridiculous, stupid question. He said, it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't matter what your major is. You're here for personal and professional development. And it's kind of, as a couple of people noted, it's a lot of pressure we kind of put on students to have it all figured out, when college is a developmental path, right? It's something where, we don't even calculate graduation rate till 6 years, right? It's a long path that we kind of embark on. And I think letting our students know, hey, we're going to have resources, you're going to have opportunities, you're going to try stuff. Like Clarissa says, you're going to find the stuff you do and don't like. Maybe that's going to let a little bit of that pressure alleviate, and maybe the students won't feel maybe quite so lost. But one of the things that I'm really excited is that we have people like Melissa and other people on this call today who are worried about our students to that level. So I love that you shared that. I do want to transition to the second one, because I think we might even have some technique that we could do to solve the second one. So the second one, as I recall, Melissa, was there's a student who doesn't want to participate in a class. So it's not that they're afraid to talk, but they just don't want to participate. They just don't want to engage in those activities of that day. And I know that there's a lot of people on this call use a lot of good active learning techniques and those kind of things. So I was wondering if we kind of crowdsource some ways to get those students who don't want to participate to maybe participate. And I'm staring at some of you to make you talk, even though you don't know I'm doing it.
I was gonna say, I feel like I was just talking, but I have this often, especially in the beginning of the semester. I think they don't know I'm serious, that I really do want them to talk to their neighbor. So I walk around, even my 90-person class, I walk around, and if someone is sitting in isolation, I chat with them. And so I think they realize very quickly that they're like, oh, I better talk to my neighbor, like, or I have to talk to her. But I'll just ask them out loud too. I'll say, oh, do you have a group? And sometimes I find they were too afraid to ask their neighbors who started talking. So I'm like, oh, hey, it just happened yesterday. I was like, you don't have a group. I said, hey, you two, can you let this person in? And they were like, of course. And so it, like, if I can be their social bridge, I love doing that. But every once in a while, I do have some that are like, no. And so I talk to them just about how that impacts their learning, because there are no like participation points in that regard. But just note that by not talking it through, that's hurting this experience that I've created for you to learn. So it's your option, to not take it, but you're missing out on that kind of reciprocity, being able to talk it through with somebody.
Natalie, I really like your framing is this participation is for you, it's not for me. Because I think a lot of students think I'm performing for you, and in reality, they're deep in the learning. So I really appreciate you raising that point.
I want to jump
I'm sorry,
off of
please go
what
ahead, Andy.
Natalie just said
Yeah.
too, to add that I often frame it as this is also for the class. Like it's important for the class that you share because we are creating knowledge together. And so sharing our experiences helps other students to better understand what we're talking about. And so that it's not for me. It's not just for you, but it's for the class community. And so being engaged, and that doesn't always mean that you're talking. And if you're having a day where you're like, I can't, like, I'm low energy today. Like, I don't feel like I have a lot to say, that you can say like, hey, I want to be a listener today to my peers' conversation. Like, let me be the sounding board. So also giving students some options as to like what participation can look like. And that if they're having a day where they don't feel like doing a lot of talking, they can just say that and that's okay. But that they should be contributing to the class environment most days.
I think there's a lot of empathy in that statement, Andy. Very nice. In the chat, someone had mentioned that for non-participants, give them more attention. And I think validating our students when they do participate is a great way to kind of shape that behavior moving forward. One of the things that I tell people all the time is if you want your students to participate, you want them to engage in discussion or use their voice, do it day one. I think if you go, 8 weeks into the semester and say, now I want to hear what you have to say. Now my questions are no longer rhetorical. It's hard to do. If you do some norm setting on day one to get them to practice this and to do so in safe ways that scaffold into more difficult things over the course of the semester, I think it's a little bit easier to do that. Now, what I suspect is that Melissa's colleague who raised this question probably does those things. And we have kind of an individual outlier who is kind of resistant to those opportunities. So we've talked about kind of the general things that work. So now what happens when you really have somebody who doesn't want to play? And Andy mentions as well, also asking, and for those of you like, I can read the chat too. For those of you who may be watching asynchronously, you might not see the chat. So Andy also wrote in the chat to make sure to ask questions without correct answers. So they have a less chance of being wrong.
Yeah, Don, I think you're right. Since it's not my class, it's hard to speak to all the specifics, but I do think this teacher is doing the general things and it's kind of an outlier. I personally had an outlier a few semesters ago where it was so extreme. It's the only time I've ever done this. I actually had the student leave the class like for the remainder of the semester and just meet with me individually, but there were only 3 weeks left. A lot of different circumstances going into that, including some personal mental health issues as well. And the person was fine with me and they probably were better off with me. And so was the rest of the class. That's why I ended up asking them, do you just want to meet with me? Because I thought it would help the student and the whole class. but this person in the other class is just, the instructors talk to them, they know they're shy, but even just turn to your partner and answer this question, they're just refusing to participate. So these are still really, really helpful suggestions, but it's kind of an interesting situation that I haven't observed myself. But I don't know if you all have thoughts on at what point is this kind of behavior disruptive to the class, even if the person isn't, they're not like yelling or throwing things or interrupting or saying, you know, they're just kind of not participating, but that's its own type of disruption. How you can handle something like that, especially it's a smaller class of about 20 students.
Yeah, I was thinking about a situation that I had like this a number of years ago in my CAT community class, and again, relatively small class, and the students sat right in the front row. So right in the front row center, so you know the colleagues can see them, I can see them, and I just said, "Hey, how's it going?" And she's like, "It's bad." Like first day, she's like, "It's bad." I was like, "Well, what's bad?" She's like, "I hate all my classes." And I said, "Well, hopefully you won't hate this one, you know." And she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna hate this one too. I already know it." Um, so it was like a great start. So we're starting to do stuff, and immediately, you know, I'm kind of, you know, meet your neighbor sort of thing, icebreaker activity. She's like, "I don't care to meet any of these people," you know, kind of thing. Very, very kind of loud. Now the other students are like, "What's going on?" And that student didn't last at K-State. You know, they kind of dropped out of school within days, you know, of kind of being here. The K-State First staff was really good about kind of, you know, exploring what was kind of going on. And it was kind of a first generation college student who was too far from home, couldn't kind of handle the expectations from their family, weren't here for themselves or here kind of to, you know, carry that legacy. They didn't have that social support, that familial support close, and it just didn't work. That makes me bad, but I don't know what I could have really done to alleviate all of those other things impacting the student. And the issue with a lot of the students in these kind of outlier resistant situations, I suspect, is there's reasons for what they're doing that we're never going to be aware of. You know, we kind of talked about this before. Like we don't know what's kind of going on with that student, and it's probably stuff we can't easily fix. So if you're doing the things that we've talked about, reaching out, creating a supportive environment, letting the student know that they're valued, letting the student know they belong, and that's not working, I don't know what else there is. If they are breaking the student code of conduct, I don't want it to, you know, kind of get that far. You can again kind of follow a conduct sort of thing, and they'll have a conference with that student and kind of, you know, discuss the behavior and all of those sorts of things. And you can do that yourself if you'd like. But if it's creating a disruptive situation, or, you know, maybe even a situation that makes some of the other students feel less welcome or less safe, it's probably something you get to deal with, and that's never fun to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Don. I'll have to share that with my colleague because I know them personally. They have a very hard time letting go if they
Yeah.
think they can do more, and they'll do about 1,000 more things instead of, I've done 10 more that I need to, I got to do 1,000. So I think for her to hear, hey, you may just have to let it go. Because I'll tell her I've asked you all this. Hey, so I'm curious if any of you all have tips based on other comments and knowing some of you and being empathetic, compassionate people. How do you let go of a student when you feel like you've done everything you can? Because we obviously want to do all that we can for our classes and our students, you know, within reason that's still healthy for ourselves. But what helps you to say, all right, I just gotta let this go. I've done what I can.
I think I start with like inviting the student to have a conversation and providing the student with some autonomy to say, like, I see that participation doesn't seem to be like something that's really, you know, your strength, something that's working for you. What does participation look like to you? What would be supportive? Would it be easier for you to write down your thoughts rather than speak them out loud? You know, and to have kind of a conversation about what participation looks like to the student, because you might find some interesting answers that the student maybe thinks that they don't need to participate because that's not important, or it allows you to kind of address some misconceptions that the student might have, or get their ideas as to like what would work for them. And I think that when you do that, you get to that point and you talk through the student about, like, you know, what are their options, and talk about what are the problems or the negative consequences of lack of participation and what that does to the class environment. If the student is still not participating, then you just have to say, look, this is a class where like it's really important that there's a class environment where students feel like they can not only be here, but thrive and engage in their learning in a way that feels unencumbered. And if you can't contribute to that positive class environment, then I need to ask if this class is for you. And then, like what Don said, you know, sometimes tough love is the way to go. And so you have to consider, do you need to fill out a code of conduct report? Are there more serious actions that need to be taken? But I think that kind of laying down the gauntlet, like, look, I'm here, I'm empathetic, I have ideas, let's talk about what it looks like to you. And if you're still not going to play, then there's consequences. And that's tough love. So thinking about it like tough love is, I think, helpful for people who are empathetic and want to just keep giving and giving and giving. That becomes enabling.
You know, Melissa, you started the question with, you know, kind of how do you emotionally let go, right? And I don't know that we can. I just dropped a link into the chat of a video we'd made on our Engage the Stage channel a while ago called "You Cannot Succeed for Your Students." And it kind of talks about, you can, as we've mentioned, you can lead them, you can provide the opportunities, you can provide the support, but ultimately it's on them to perform, right? Ultimately, it's on them to actually do the things. And the fact that you feel bad, the fact that many of us feel bad, is probably an indication that you're probably a decent person, right? Like that's kind of what that is. My students ask me all the time in my classes, like, if you were to make the world a better place, what would you do? And my answer is always to make people more empathetic. But I tell them the biggest issue with empathy is everything hurts. Because what happens is when you see things that don't go well, you internalize them, right? So you see the student not performing, it makes you feel bad. You see the student not having a good experience, it makes you feel bad. You see the student struggling, it makes you feel bad. That's going to happen, right? And at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep, you're not thinking about the students who succeeded in your class, you're thinking about this one person that you couldn't make it work for. But you can't. So what I usually try to do, and this is the recommendation I give, is I try to learn what I can from that experience so I can use that learning forward. Maybe I can do something different in a future situation. Maybe I can pass it on in a workshop like this or something like that. But I try to kind of intellectualize the experience, the Freudian defense mechanism, intellectualize the experience, right? Find the learning, find the wisdom, find the knowledge, to try to, you know, collect data for the next event. It's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect. But it's what I try to do for myself.
Yeah, thank you all for your thoughts, both on this question and the other one too. I really appreciate it. It's very helpful.
You came to play today. Those are some hard ones. So other questions or concerns or issues that people have. We still haven't gotten to the questions that I have, and that's fine. If we don't get to my questions, it's all good. But what other kind of questions or issues do people have? All right, well, I'll ask my questions. I'll combine them into one question. So I'm curious, this semester, right? Many of us have been teaching before, and for many of us for a long time. What has been different and surprising this semester versus other semesters that you've been teaching? How has the vibe been different? How have the students been different? How have you been different? I'm kind of just interested in this. We're always growing as teachers. You know, some people have told me, you know, teaching is boring. I don't understand that at all. I don't understand that perspective at all, because it's always new people, it's always new circumstances, it's always new questions, new examples. Teaching is always kind of a new and different endeavor from each semester. So I was kind of wondering what makes it different and surprising for you this semester.
I will say that I am teaching my first graduate seminar, as Ashley and Peyton are in there. But I'm doing it different than traditional grad seminars, and that is somewhat scary. I had to talk myself into it. But I'm also following my intuition with how I know I want it to go, and that just feels great. So I just like to say, after all these years of teaching, I can finally do something that's not traditional and feel fine with it after a little pep talk. And Ashley and Peyton can say if they like how it's going, but I told them day one, it's like a typical seminar you've had and not all at the same time.
Ashley put in the chat that she loves how it's going. So that
Yes.
is good. Natalie, I'm actually at some point I'd be really kind of curious to kind of hear what your approach is and those kind of things, because I think new is not bad, right? Different is not bad. And I think sometimes we think just because it's going to be the way someone else did it, that's going to be, a disadvantage somehow. That's how innovation happens. So I'm really kind of excited as Andy just dropped in, be a disruptor. Right? I'm excited that you're kind of thinking about graduate seminars differently than maybe, someone else might.
That I
And
am,
for those of
yes.
you who missed the first couple comments of this, we were kind of chatting about Natalie's seminar. Her seminar was about happiness. So I mean, it's got to be like the coolest class on campus right now. It's an innovative style, awesome topic. It's going to be a good time.
Oh no, it frustrates Ashley regularly, but our definitions get dicey, but it's much more activity based than I think, at least in psychology, often our seminars are. So they're headed out to do gratitude work and mindfulness activities in the next few weeks, and just having them self-reflect a little bit more than they do sometimes in a typical seminar, coupled with reading research, I think is pushing it a little bit. So we'll see how it goes, but it's feeling good to follow my intuition.
So for those of you not in psychological sciences, what Natalie is kind of talking about is the traditional graduate seminar is you read a bunch of articles and then you sit around a table and talk about them. That's what the class period is. And I imagine it's similar in many other disciplines, but just in case you weren't aware, that's the kind of trend that Natalie is bucking.
That is something that I have always seen, the graduate level courses. It's like, no, we don't do active learning here. We only do it's only discussion is the only type of like active learning, and like all these other like activities, like that's for undergraduate students. It's not rigorous. And I vehemently object to that sentiment. So I think you're doing good work.
So what else has been new or different this semester for people, or new or surprising? I'd said surprising. It doesn't have to be surprising, but what's kind of been different this semester for everybody?
I don't know if I've just crossed a threshold here, but the students seem so much younger than they used to be. I think it's because I'm closer to 50 than 40 now. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh, they're babies. Or too many of my friends have kids that are in college, and I'm like, your kid is in college? I don't know, it's a combination of factors, but they just seem so much younger than they used to be. And they still get excited about the coolest things. So I took this idea from Tracy Brimhall and then modified it for my classes, where I have a class mascot every fall for my cat community. And we vote on an animal, and I have a stuffed animal that they take home. They get it for a few days or a week, and then they take pictures with it. And I said, this is just a silly way of us getting to know each other. Because I know kids, maybe they did it in kindergarten or preschool or first grade, but this is less about the animal and more about take it to work with you, take it to your dorm room, take it to the dining hall, or if you get wherever you go, take a picture. I've had students take, one of my favorites is a picture of a student with the entire trombone section of the K-State marching band. It's like 30 students, and there's a sloth in the middle of the picture, a stuffed sloth. They were still so excited about the stuffed armadillo this time that my kid's named Tony. One of the kids yesterday was like, I was like, let's get a group picture. And he's like, who gets to hold the armadillo? I'm like, somebody in front. He steps right to the front, and I hand it to him. He's super excited. I said, my kids still need to take some pictures with it. Somebody else will get it next week. And they're like, oh, we have to wait a week. They're just so excited about it. And it's optional. They don't even have to do it. They just take a turn. But I think just kind of that perspective that I don't care how old you get, like the graduate stuff, fun stuff is fun stuff, and mixing it up is good, and active learning and doing things different than discussion is just really helpful.
I love that, Melissa. And you've kind of indicated before that, we're talking about first year, first semester college students. And for those of you who haven't had this opportunity, I hope you get the opportunity to teach first year, first semester college students. There's nothing more endearing than a student who's excited about the experience. Last year, I taught general psychology in the fall, as I always do. And you just get the wonderful energy, and they're awesome, and they're excited, and they have wonderful questions, and they raise their hands to go to the bathroom, and it's so endearing. And then in the spring, they're already broken, right? That first day of the spring semester, just a completely different vibe from the fall semester. They're just not as excited, like, all right, where's the syllabus? You know, kind of thing. Is that first day? It's like, no, we're excited, right? So for me, it feels different to kind of have this energy on that first day again. But it's just that cycle of the first year, first semester college student, which is such an amazing vibe to have in class.
I have to echo that because my oldest is senior in high school this year. And so this year, more than any other year, I'm really seeing my students as like my kids' generation and having interactions with them. I'm like, oh my gosh, they talk like my kids. Like it's making me feel a little old, but I'm hanging in there. But it's fun because when I started teaching, I was around my students' age. You know, I was like, I had to like dress nice to make sure that I really like established myself as the professor of the class and not as one of the fellow students. And now here I am like, oh, you're my kid's age.
Yeah. Scott mentions that by the spring, they're taking pictures of the slide at an angle with their phone. In my class, just do it. I don't even need you to be hiding it. Just take a picture of the slide if you want. It's all good. We've kind of reached the end of our session. One of the things I had mentioned this last week, we're trying to get done about 10 of to get people to their 1 o'clock events. We know that people start to drift off of that. So we're trying to be a little bit more intentional about being empathetic to your schedules. So we're going to try to end about 10 of, which is right about where we're at. I want to thank all of you for being here. I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had. I enjoy all of our conversations. I'll remind you that next week, Andy Thompson will be here talking about how we follow through and the promise of support. He's from the Student Support and Accountability Office, previously the Office of Student Life. We'll have a post-event survey for you to kind of fill out about this one. We have TLC certificates and fellows that you may potentially get, and the information for that is in the chat. And we are so excited that you're here. Hopefully we'll see you next week. If anyone has any additional questions, I'll stick around for a minute. But otherwise, have a great rest of your Wednesday, and thank you for spending some time with us.